Hold on, I'm just seeing if, oh, there we go. Okay, I think we're good. All right, well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this brief conversation on climate change and international relations. My name is Natalie Hudson. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Dayton, where I also serve as executive director of our Human Rights Center. And I am here with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Boyer, who is the Board of Trustees professor at the University of Connecticut, and an expert in things related to climate change. And so has done a lot of research in this area, both globally and locally. So we're thrilled to have him talk to us a bit about this very complex topic and dive in. So we'll get started. The first question that we're going to tackle is why is climate change so challenging, so complex? Help us understand.
All right. Thank you very much, Natalie. I think the first thing that we need to focus on is that there's an enormous amount of misinformation out in the world, both in the media, but particularly coming out of many politicians around the world about the threat of climate change, what we should be doing about it, and whether or not, frankly, it's a problem, a real problem. And I think that that's something that is difficult to deal with in many respects. And we've also seen the politicization of science, that there's so much of this debate about, oh, there's ambiguity about the climate science. There is no ambiguity about the climate science. It is about as solid a body of research and data about global warming in climate science circles that there is no ability to really refute that kind of research. And the warming temperatures are coming, and all of the other attendant pieces, from flooding to fire, and the list goes on, are also coming with it. And so I think you see a lot of that. And so one of the things that we're going to have to increasingly deal with are exactly what I just said. Last summer we had massive flooding in Vermont, a place that is generally seen as a safe place in terms of climate threats. We've seen incredible wildfires just in the past few weeks in California, not as large as the Camp Fire and the destruction of the city of Paradise, California a few years ago, but still enormous fire risk in many parts of the US. And that's a recurrent component to all of this. And then we've also seen the devastating tornadoes in the middle of the Midwest. And all of these things are just sort of the tip of the iceberg of these impacts, because not only are they problems today, but they're going to continue to be increasing problems, both in terms of the number of times they happen in a given year, but also in terms of the severity and the unpredictability of those kinds of things. The last part I'll put on the table here is that, we're in a place where we're probably on the cusp of doing too little too late. That if we don't act now, and don't act now in a pretty substantial way, the problems that we're going to confront are going to be exceedingly difficult to both manage and to fix. And that's really the crux of the problem from a political standpoint, is that action needs to happen now. It probably should have happened 25 years ago, if not before that. But dealing with a looming crisis and a looming set of impacts is even more difficult to handle.
So I think for many of us, all of this feels very overwhelming, right? The really huge problems that transcend borders. So what can we do? I mean, we as citizens, as students, as a community.
So I think the more we can do to educate ourselves and educate those around us, the better off we are. Knowing what the impacts are, knowing the fact that when we see flooding running down the street in front of our own home, that's likely a climate change impact. How many times have you seen flooding in recent years that you didn't see in years past? And think about those kinds of things, the frequency of various severe weather events, and that's a product. Educate yourself, think about those kinds of things. And one of the pieces of that educational process is starting to think about the term climate adaptation. So the need to actually adapt to the impacts that we are facing, rather than just focusing on greenhouse gas mitigation. There was a long time that the environmental community mostly wanted to focus on reducing greenhouse gases, and that's a noble goal, and that is something that we should do. But anything that we do in terms of greenhouse gas reduction probably isn't going to have much of an impact for another 50 years. But in terms of climate adaptation, dealing with flooding on the ground, dealing with you're doing a better job of stormwater management, doing a better job of zoning residential communities better and more logically, moving away from the coast, which no one wants to hear about. They don't want to hear about the word retreat from the beach and all of those kinds of things. But all of those are things that we do need to educate ourselves about. We also need to think about the linkages that climate change has to so many other things like conflict and security. We're going to see increasing conflicts around the world that are generated by environmental hazards. And so how do we deal with these kinds of things? That they are environmentally caused conflicts versus in the past, conflict caused environmental problems. And we're starting to see the reversal of that. We're going to see refugee flows and immigration problems as a result of individuals and groups of people migrating from one area that has been devastated by climate impacts to other areas. And then, we've been sensitized over the past few years about COVID and Zika and other health threats. At least some of those health threats come from disease-generated vectors, whether it's increased mosquito populations, whether it's the migration of those mosquito populations, and we're going to see health threats emerge due to climate change that we really haven't encountered before. And then the last thing I'll put on the table is try your best to get involved, okay? Almost every town around the country has some kind of organization that is working on climate impacts. Many states have these organizations that are trying to monitor what towns are doing to make themselves more resilient and sustainable communities. Find out what those are in your community and try to get involved and have an impact where you can.
Right, absolutely. And college campuses, right? I mean, lots of
Absolutely,
opportunities there as well. All right, so as we conclude, are we too late? I mean, I think some of us feel doomsday about this, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, again, there's a much more extensive review of climate change and environmental impacts and sort of environmental assessments in the book, and particularly in the last chapter of the book on the global environment. But throughout all of the chapters, we're talking about these kinds of things and how they relate to one another and across issues and across venues and regions and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, I'm an optimist, but it's difficult to be optimistic when you're facing the extensive nature of the threats that we have in front of us. I think we'll do okay, but we are going to be playing far too much catch up. And unfortunately, our political systems don't lend themselves very well toward anticipatory policy.
Yeah, there's still quite a bit of work to be done, and we need all of our young people to be engaged. So we hope that this conversation has been helpful to all of you. We hope you will read in more detail both the last chapter of the book, but throughout the book, the connections that climate change has for our global economy, for armed conflict, for human rights, and beyond. So we thank you so much, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you very much.